check out this bag. This is a brand new pattern just launched today and I'm going to show you how to make it. Hi, I'm Emma from Studio 77. On today's video I'm going to show you how to make the Ready to Go purse by Tobi Stylx. It's a super cute bag. It's got a wristlet option, or you can have a crossbody strap as well. It's got really nice pockets on the inside. It's got a slip pocket. It's got a inner zipper pocket as well. It's a great bag with this feature panel on the front, and if you keep watching to the end I'm going to show you exactly how to get money off this pattern, and not only that, how to enter an amazing competition with cash prizes. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, you want to grab the pattern, and I've put full links in the description below. You need to cut out all your pieces, and you want to think about your front section, your front panel, because obviously that's going to be a feature. And as you can see, I've got my lemur here, which is really sweet. I've also thought about where the seam allowances go, so that when the pieces are put together, we're not cutting off any of that central piece. So you might need to do a little bit of fussy cutting if you've got any kind of feature on your fabric that you're choosing. You can of course use vinyl as well, or cotton canvas, anything that you'd like to use. So I've cut out all my pieces, I've got all my hardware ready, and I've also interfaced the back of a lot of these pieces as well. So for the vinyl, you want to make sure that you've interfaced those as well. With vinyl, it's absolutely fine to use interfacing. You just want to keep moving the iron so that it's not in one place for too long. Almost all the vinyls I've used have been able to withstand the heat of interfacing, so don't worry too much about that. Just use your trusty Teflon sheet that I'm always raving about. I will put a link for that in the description as well. And just go slowly and get all those pieces interfaced. It's all on the pattern, so you won't miss it. Now, one thing that I did wrong that I want to point out, so I'm going to change it into a little bit of a feature. So I don't think it's too much of an issue, but you might want to note as well. On the pattern, with the cutting instructions, with the cutting list, it has height by width. Now I missed that. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was a bit tired, so I did width by height, and if you've got a directional print like I do, that is obviously a bit of an issue, but it's absolutely fine because it was for the slip pocket. So what I'm going to do, and you'll see in a minute, is when it comes to doing my slip pocket, I'm just going to put these two pieces together so that I've got my geometric fabric on the inside and it won't notice too much. If anything, it will be a bit of a feature that on the inside you're going to have this bright fabric standing out. I've also then used that same fabric for the inside of my pocket as well, so it's not going to be an issue when it comes to that. But I wanted to point that out in case you've got a directional print and you don't want to make that same mistake. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stitch our front panel. So we're going to stitch these pieces together, and we're going to just place it on there, clip it together, and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I've stitched that C2 panel to the front piece, and then what I need to do is we need to just open up that seam. I'm going to finger press it down, and then we need to, from the top side, stitch each side of that, holding the seam allowance down, and we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch from the seam edge. Then we want to repeat that for the C1 panel as well on the other side. It's worth noting as well that I'm using a jeans needle throughout this project. I'm also using, for all my top stitching, I'm using a 2.8 length stitch, and for anything that needs a bit more strength, like the outside of the pocket, things like that, I'm going to be using a 2.2 stitch length. Okay, so we've stitched up our front panel, so that's looking really nice. I'm just going to place that to one side, and then we need to start on our lining, and we're going to put in the zipper along the top. Now we need to turn it over, and we need to mark down 1.5 inches from the top. So my ruler happens to be 1.5 inches, and I'm using my trusty friction pen. So I'm just going to draw a super long line, and that needs to then be 8 inches long. So I'm going to find the middle. So it's 11. So there's my middle, 5.5. And then I need to make that 8. And then that needs to be 1/2 inch. Then in the middle of that, we need to draw another line, which is going to be 1/4 inch, of course, because that was 1/2 inch. And then 3/8 inch. Just going to make a mark. And then I'm going to draw a line from that point to that corner on each corner, like so. And then we need to take our interior pocket, which for me is my geometric print, and I need to fold that in half and mark the middle of that one as well. So then once we've marked that center line for the pocket, we then want to flip over our main lining piece, and then 1 inch from the top. So I'm just going to make a little dot so that I can see it. Might be hard for you to see, but I can see that there's a yellow line there. And then I'm going to make sure that my central or my middle marks are lined up, and that the edge of my zipper pocket is lining up and they're right sides together. And I'm going to pin that in place. Then once I've pinned it in place, we're going to flip it over, and on the machine we're just going to stitch around that outside rectangle. Do you have a favourite bag pattern that you'd like to be made into a tutorial? Let me know in the comments below. So now we've stitched that rectangle, we're then going to cut along that line, going from those points up and to the other points. And you want to leave about 1 millimetre of that from that corner, because obviously otherwise it might come undone. And then we need to flip through our zipper pocket through that hole, and give it a bit of a wiggle so that you get those corners really nice. And then we need to press that so that it's all laying nice and flat. Okay, so now that's pressed, we're going to insert our zipper. Now my zipper is way too long, it's just one that I had already that I wanted to use. So we're going to, that bit's going to be chopped off, so it's all fine. So I'm going to just place that in with the zipper on the left side, the zipper pull on the left side, pin that in, and then I'm going to stitch 1/8 inch all the way around. Okay, now I've sewn that in, I'm just going to chop off the end of my zip that I'm not using. And when you cut through zips like that, it's always good to just burn the ends. Okay, so then the next thing we need to do is we need to place the right sides of the pocket together, and making sure we don't catch that lining, we're going to stitch all the way around from the bottom left corner all the way up and down to complete our pocket. So I'm going to actually pin my lining out of the way, because I really don't want that to get caught. Now you do have to be careful because there isn't that much to play with on this top edge of the pocket, so just go nice and slow. I think I'm going to keep my zipper foot in so I can get it really close to that seam so that it's not an issue. Okay, so we've stitched all around the edge there, so we've got our little pocket. The next thing we're going to move on to is the interior slip pocket, which goes over the top of this zip. So like I said at the beginning, I messed up a bit with my cutting, so hopefully you won't do the same. And so for this, I've got 2 pieces, but you will of course have 1 piece. So for me, I'm going to place right sides together, and I'm going to pin around the edge. For you, you will just fold yours in half. If you'd like to do the same as I've done with my slip pocket and have a different fabric on the inside, then that's totally fine. You just need to cut 2 pieces, which are 9 by 6 inches. So that allows for 1/2 inch seam allowance along the bottom. So what we need to do is we need to stitch a short bit at this opening. So make sure if you have got a directional print that you're doing it at the right bit at the top. So we're going to stitch 1 inch along this edge. We're going to stitch all the way down. You're going to stop there, and you're going to start here, up there and across again. If you're doing it the same as me, you're going to go across, down, all the way and up and across. And I've left a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom just to make it really tricky. So we're going to do 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to do a 1/2 inch, 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. So you want to sew around the edge, starting from the top along these edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to clip the corners and we're going to turn it the right way out. Then once we turned it the right way out, we're going to press that all nicely, and then I like to press before I stitch. I find it a bit easier, and I find it looks a bit neater generally as well. So I'm going to press it, and then we're going to stitch along that top edge. And this needs to be just in line with the top of our zip, which is about 1.5 inches from the edge. That's what it says on the pattern, but I'm actually going to do mine 1.25 inches from the top edge, just because that's how mine's worked out. So that's fine. And we just want to make sure that when we're sewing this, we don't catch that back pocket that we've just stitched in. So I'm going to pin that out of the way up here, just to be sure, and I'm going to be really careful when I sew that top edge, especially that I don't catch that. I'm also, when I stitch it down, I'm just going to do a little triangle here just to make sure I look quite like that on pockets, so that it doesn't flap over too much. So after stitching all the way around the edge, I just wanted to show you that what I'm going to do that top triangle that I was talking about. Just going to take that pin out and take that pin out. I've unpinned the back because I am going to just catch across those as well, just so that I've got those in place. You can see if I don't do it, it's not quite, my stitches haven't quite gone to the edge. If I do that top triangle, that's going to make it really nice and secure. So I keep my zipper pull in the middle, and then I'm just going to top stitch 2 little triangles. Okay, so that section is done. We can put that to one side, and we're going to move over to the zipper tab now. And these are the F pieces, and they are 2 by 1.5. So we need to draw a line down the center on the wrong side. pieces along the length of the piece. So then we need to fold each half into the center and a bit of a finger press, and then we're going to fold it again, and then we're going to clip it to hold it in place. I'm going to put my zipper on the end now. Just going to cut off a bit and cut down, make it a bit easier. So I've put my zipper tape on now, and I need to make sure that that whole thing is 8.5 inches. So I'm just going to cut that down. And then we're going to clip our zipper ends in place. And then we're just going to top stitch those in place. So now that's done, we are just going to trim off that excess fabric each side of the zipper tape. So we need to fold our zipper in half, and we need to mark the center. So I'm just going to pop a pin in. Then we need to take our center panel that we made earlier, and we've got the center is the middle of our front piece there. So I'm just going to pop that pin in there, so that's really easy to see. And then we need to match up those two central marks. And put a clip in there. And we need to make sure as well that our zipper pull is on the left. And we need to base that in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now we've basted that, we then want to clip into place our lining panel that we sewed earlier with the pocket inside. And we're going to sew that with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 1 centimetre, and we're going to use a zipper foot so that we can get close to that zipper teeth. So we've got the main front panel, we've got the zip in the middle, and then we've got our lining right sides down. Okay, so now we need to turn them so that they are the wrong sides facing, and then we need to top stitch along that zipper seam with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So then we need to repeat the steps we've just done to attach the back panel and the other lining panel. So we're going to mark the middle of our back panel. I'm just going to make a finger press. Make sure that that's lined up. Moving on to our D-ring connectors, we've cut out our H pieces earlier, and we need to mark a line down the centre of these two, and we need to mark it in the middle, which is of course 1.5 inches. Do that on both. Now, if you're doing the wristlet, you only need to make one of these. I'm going to show you how to make the wristlet strap, but I'm also going to make 2 connectors because I want to have that versatility for my bag. So it's up to you whether you do 1 or 2 at this point. Then you want to take some double-sided tape and just place it down the center of each one. Then we're going to fold each side in to meet the middle. Fold it again, and then you've got a 3/4 inch strap. So we're just going to place a clip on there to hold that in place. And I'm just going to top stitch on those 2 edges as well. So now those are stitched, we're going to place in our D-ring and put a little clip to hold that in place. So once we've made our connectors up, we then need to attach them to the side of the bag, and we need to do that 1 inch down from that top edge. So it's about there. I'm going to place a clip in, and then I'm going to baste it in place. And we could live dangerously and not baste it, but I've done that before and it can get a bit tricky. We are going through a lot of layers of vinyl here, so I just want to make sure that that's really nice and secure and isn't going to move. Okay, so now we've got our connectors in place. We want to make sure that our zip is in fact undone, because that's going to make it easier for when we're birthing the bag. We want to place our 2 vinyl pieces together, right sides together. You can see I had a little bit of a burn issue there, but thankfully I was using my Teflon sheet, so it wasn't an issue. But yeah, that's why it's always good to use that Teflon sheet. We're placing our right sides together of our lining and the right sides together of our outer vinyl, or our outer fabric if you're not using vinyl. And we're going to just clip those in place. And we're clipping right sides together of the lining as well. Okay, so then we need to stitch up the lining, and we need to leave a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to go down this outer edge, and then we're just going to do a little bit, about 1 inch in from these 2 sides, and again on that outer edge. We are not sewing this seam or this seam on both sides. Okay, so then we need to kind of pinch these seams, these corners, so that they make it go into a box. So we're going to pinch it like that. And I'm also going to display my seam allowance, and I'm going to stick a couple of pins in, and then I'm going to sew that using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So then we want to move on to sewing the outer part of the bag. There is actually an alternative in the pattern for how to sew it without using the rivet on the side, but I really like the rivet. That all of my hardware is rose gold, and I think it's going to add that bling to it. So then we want to sew along all the edges to close our outer bag, and we're sewing 1/4 of an inch in. Okay, so I've stitched around the edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've actually reinforced where those deconnectors are, because obviously that is a bit of a stress point on the bag. I just want to make sure that they're really, really strong. Then we need to turn the bag the right way out through to the other side, and we're going to do that through the hole in the lining. Now, before we go completely all the way through, one thing I didn't do, which you should do, is I didn't clip the corners. So I'm just going to do that. It's going to make it a lot easier when we want to get that point of that corner. So I'm just going to cut off the excess on that corner. Same on the other one. Now, it takes a bit of time, but you can get there. And we're going to use a pointy tool to get that corner out. You can use a pen, or even scissors if you're super careful, but I would advise against scissors, especially with vinyl. Okay, so now we've birthed our bag, we then want to close our opening in our lining. So we just want to fold the seam allowance to the inside, pin it in place, and then we're going to sew that lining up. Okay, then we need to put our lining to the inside. Then we need to box the bottom of the bag. So we need to measure 2.5 inches up from the pointed tip. And I'm just going to put a pin in the seam, because that's not going to make a hole. Then you want to fold the bag up so that the pin is at the bottom of the fold. And it's a bit tricky because the lining's kind of in the way. So you just want to make sure that you're kind of keeping it out of the way, but also keeping it in line, if that makes sense. So you can see the edge of the point from your front panel is actually at the bottom of that fold. So that is also a really good marker. Then you want to mark that, and we're going to make holes for the rivets. Now you want to make sure that the holes are not going through the seams, because if they do, they will weaken that seam. So make the hole just off, but the rivet will cover it, so it won't look like it's off. And I'm going to make sure that I'm marking the rivets on the same equal distance from the edge. So I eyeballed that one, so I know that that's where I'd like it to be, and that's 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to double check that that's where I'm going to do my other side. Make sure that I haven't caught the lining in this first hole, and make a hole going through the outer layers. Then I want to make a hole going through the main section of the bag. So again, I'm just going to make sure I'm folding it in the right place, and I'm actually going to put a pin through, because that's going to make a hole in the vinyl, so I'm going to be able to see where to make a very, very small hole. A bit tricky to see. And I want to make sure that my lining is lining in the right place as well when I do that. And when it comes to making this second hole, it's really hard to get the press in there, so I've just made it with an awl. One thing to note as well is that because there's so much bulk in that seam, I realised that I've caught my seam allowance in that bit of the vinyl, so I just want to make sure that that seam allowance is going the other way, because it's going to be tricky for the rivet to go through all of those layers. So I'm just going to push those out of the way onto the other side. Because it's quite hard to see the hole in the lining as well, I find it a lot easier to put the scissors in. Then I can see the scissors inside, so that I can then kind of follow the scissors through and push that rivet in. Moving on to our G piece, we're now going to make our wristlet strap. So we need to mark a line in the middle and put some double-sided, just like we did before. Then we need to fold each side in to meet that line. And we need to clip it as we go. And we need to slide on our swivel hook. And we need to make the two short edges meet, and we're going to sew with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we're going to fold it in half again. Now, just before we do this, I'm just going to clip those edges so we've not got those kind of edges that are going to stick out. Okay, and then we're going to fold it in half and clip in place. Then I'm just going to top stitch around those two sides. So now I've top stitched that all around. I'm then going to stitch the clasp in place by stitching in the ditch of that seam that we've made, and I'm going to add a rivet just to secure it. Last thing is to make the tassel, which is going to go on the end of my zipper. I've got a zipper which is a kind of DIY one, so I've got an adjustable little D-ring on there that I can slide my tassel cap onto. Unfortunately, I didn't actually record the making of my tassel, but there are full instructions in the pattern. If you would like me to do a tutorial on how to make tassels, pop a comment in the box below. So what do you think of this bag? It's awesome, isn't it? I'm so pleased with how it's turned out. If you'd like to get 20% off, just check the description below for a coupon code until Monday. To be entered into the competition to win some great cash prizes, including $80 for the first prize, then you need to head over to Tobi Stylx Facebook group and enter your bag into the competition. Coming up on the screen right now are some more great tutorials that I think you're gonna love. I'll see you on the next video.